Hello and welcome back to another episode of I'll Allow It Nevada, your go-to podcast for insightful glimpses into the Nevada judiciary. I'm your host, Seth Easley, representing Supreme Court of Nevada Administrative Office of the Courts. Today we're exploring an important topic, civil commitments and assisted outpatient treatment, or AOT. This program provides court-supervised mental health treatment to individuals with serious mental illness, aiming to prevent crises that can lead to hospitalization, incarceration, or harm. Joining me to discuss this topic are Judges Cynthia Lu of the Second Judicial District Court and Judge Yeager of the Eighth Judicial District Court. Judges, thank you both very much for joining me today.
All right. Thank you for having us, Seth.
Yeah, thank you.
To kick off the conversation, perhaps we can just start with a general question. What is the Assisted Outpatient Treatment Program? How does it work? What are its goals?
So the Assisted Outpatient Treatment Program is a court-ordered assisted program in which the participant is supervised by the court, even though that participant is residing in the community. And the goal is to really end the participants revolving in and out of the hospitals, in and out of the jail, to really have them thrive in the community with supports from both outpatient treatment and the court.
The way I explain it is under civil commitments, the court orders someone to inpatient treatment. Under AOT, the court orders them to outpatient treatment. And so it's that constant supervision and meeting with the court and the treatment providers that is kind of that key piece in motivating that person to continue in treatment.
Okay, so you touched briefly on this. So what differs AOT from other forms of mental health treatment or commitment? Will you just expand on that a little bit?
So one difference usually is AOT is a civil case, so it's not criminal. So a lot of times when people hear about specialty courts, it's all linked to a criminal case, someone's been arrested. AOT is a civil case. It doesn't require an arrest. It doesn't require a criminal case. And so the person isn't, quote, in trouble with the law, but it is a court order for the person to participate in outpatient treatment with court oversight. But the person is not technically in, quote, trouble.
Now, and I will say, someone can get ordered to AOT as a condition of probation if they do have a criminal case, but it's really more, the goal is to keep them from cycling in and out of the hospitals because of their mental health crises, to make sure that they are stable, taking their medication, and using the tools that they are learning through treatment.
Okay, so can we just maybe start from the beginning? Like how does someone get referred to it?
So I will tell you down south, oftentimes we will look at those people who are what we call super users of the system, okay. People who are constantly having multiple petitions for civil commitment filed over and over again because they end up in crises all the time, either because they're not taking their medication, they don't have the supports that they need, that kind of a thing. And if we can identify that person or if some of our community partners can identify that person, they can get referred to the Assisted Outpatient Treatment Program, which down here is through Southern Nevada Adult Mental Health. And so then they'll do an assessment and make a recommendation to the court along with a treatment plan as to whether or not that person is appropriate through a petition to be committed to AOT.
In Washoe County, our hospital is Northern Nevada Adult Mental Health Services, who provides the services, but we can get referrals from a family member, from the public defender, from a social worker, sometimes from a hospital where the person is inpatient, from a physician. So anyone can refer to the AOT program, and then our AOT supervisor will go through the referrals, follow up, start the assessment process to see if this individual, if AOT would be a good fit for the individual.
And I should say, down south, same as well as far as those entities that can refer. The people that we are really concentrating on are the people that really suffer from the most acute, serious mental illnesses, who really need that extra support in order to be safely in the community. And when I say safely, I also mean for themselves. It's really mostly for themselves because most of the time when they decompensate, they're not taking care of themselves and things like that.
So when an individual is referred or they're placed in AOT, so what does that look like for them? Like, what kind of support are they getting? Does AOT work with different providers, different stakeholders, and how are they given support through their process?
So in Washoe County, they're assigned a psychiatric caseworker, and there's at least contact 3 times a week. And there's daily groups that are offered. There's individual counseling offered. We have music, art, therapy, substance use groups, responsible living, help increase their daily skill sets for daily living, for daily independence. And obviously we have the medication clinic where they see a psychiatrist or APRN so that we monitor their medications, see what's working, address any side effects. And then we also have social events for our participants so they learn to socialize one with each other. Family members sometimes attend. So we also extend support to family members, especially if participants are able to return to homes with family members, which more family members will tend to be more open to with the AOT support coming in to also help the family members. So really, it's very intensive kind of wraparound services for that participant to help them gain more life skills, be stable on their medications, and really work towards them being able to live more independently in a positive, healthy way.
And we have a similar type of situation down south. For those people who have family support and have a place to live, we obviously work with them and with their family. If we need to add occupational therapists or things like that to help assist them with those activities of daily living. However, if they do come to us unhoused, there is some funding for a housing piece. So that is also something that sort of differentiates AOT from some of the other programs that are available.
Okay, so yeah, that is a lot of support it provides. So I think a lot of people might not have a clear picture in their head it's designed to treat people with severe mental illness, right? So what might be a patient that you would see that you might need to refer to this program? To be honest, myself, I'm not even sure what that looks like.
Sure. So, when we're talking about the types of serious mental illnesses that would sort of get someone to this place, we're mostly seeing people with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, that kind of more serious mental illness and I will say that the vast majority of our participants have either schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. So without that proper, consistent medication and oversight, really has issues with just being able to live in a manner that is safe and productive. So those are the people that we're talking about. Now, there are a lot of people that have serious mental illnesses that are able to navigate, making sure that they're taking their medication properly, all that kind of stuff. And they don't need that extra support. So we're talking about a much smaller percentage of that population. I don't know, Cynthia, if there's other stuff you wanted to add to that.
So our statute does have a criteria which requires that the person be hospitalized at least twice in the past 48 months, in the past 4 years. Or incarcerated due to mental illness as the main factor. So there is that minimum requirement to be an AOT is you're not just, quote, mentally ill, but you were so severely mentally ill, you were hospitalized at least twice.
Okay.
Yeah, and oftentimes we'll see hospitalizations that are, 10, 15 times in a year. So, it can be quite an issue. So.
Okay, so something you mentioned when we were planning this discussion were walk-in petitions. I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak about that. So what are walk-in petitions and how do they function in this process?
So in Washoe County, we call them walk-in petitions. I think they're called something different in the South.
Yeah, we call them family petitions.
Okay. Because normally they're filed by a family member who is very concerned about a loved one's mental health at that period in time. It can be filed by a spouse, a parent, an adult child, a legal guardian, a registered nurse, physician's assistant, social worker, marriage family therapist, or a psychologist, and they're actually the ones filing the petition to ask the court to place a mental health crisis hold on an individual because of their behavior. But it has to rise to the level of them potentially harming themselves or others. And it can't be for reasons such as something organic like dementia, substance use. And, we get actually quite a few petitions where, concerned family members want their loved one to get help, but it's the obvious issue appears to be substance use versus mental health. And sometimes substance use creates a mental health condition, but there's really no underlying mental health condition. But it's filed by any family member. And then in the North, if it's not sufficient to grant on the pleadings, I'll usually hold a hearing within 24 hours, unless it's just a denial because it really is a substance use issue versus mental health issue. When I have a hearing, that petitioner will come in. They can be by Zoom or in person. And then usually, based on the more additional information I'm getting, I decide whether or not I grant it. Now, if it's granted, it means that law enforcement will go pick up that person and bring that person to the hospital, where the next process is the hospital will evaluate to see if there should be a hold placed on that person. And then if they initiate the hold, that's when our whole civil commitment petition process starts. So it's basically the step before potential civil commitment. And Judge Yeager, I don't know if you have something to add on that.
No, I mean, I guess it's just, it gives the family an opportunity to petition the court for a pickup of their loved one. Usually, at least down south, most people end up on a petition for a civil commitment. And just so that we're clear, that's someone's in a mental health crisis and they end up being in the hospital based on that mental health crisis hold. But usually that's initiated, like there's a phone call to police and Metro comes and they pick them up on the mental health crisis hold and bring them to the hospital. So the vast majority of the time, people come to us through the police. But this is a way that the family, if they're seeing some really concerning behaviors, can also ask for a way to have their loved one picked up and looked at and assessed.
So civil commitments, we're talking like involuntary civil commitments.
Yeah, against their will.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So with that, what are some, because that's something, so what due process protections exist for individuals who are subject to these involuntary civil commitments?
So I always say it's the same types of due processes that kick in when someone gets arrested. So they're given a notice. So they are served with the petition, which is asking that they be held against their will at the hospital, and also the types of behaviors that's on the mental health crisis paperwork that give rise to those concerns, right? And maybe I should back up a little bit. So when they're brought to the hospital, they're seen for up to 72 hours at the hospital. If the hospital still determines that they need to be held, they will file a petition. If they find that they are no longer a danger to themselves or others, or that any behaviors that they've had are not because of a mental illness, they're released. So that's step one of due process, right? They get released if there's not the evidence to actually keep them there. Step two is that then the hospital has to file a petition within that first 72 hours. So there's time frames with tight time frames that they need to follow. And then within that time, after the petition is filed, the court has to have a hearing within 6 judicial days. Also another pretty tight time frame. As soon as that petition is filed, they are also assigned an attorney to consult with them and to talk about what their options are. That's another part of due process. And also our court doctors are then assigned to assess them. Another part of due process, because then they're getting 2 other opinions besides the hospital. And then, and they're given notice of all this while it's happening so that they know what's happening. And then at the court hearing, they also have an opportunity to be heard. So there's all sorts of different ways that they have input into what happens to them, that they know what's happening, and they're able to consult with an attorney about what's happening.
I agree. It's the same process up in the north. They have their defense attorney that's assigned once the petition's filed. Defense attorney in the north is present during the evaluation process with the 2 court doctors, and is present at the hearings and has the ability and access to talk to their client at any of the facilities. And the patient is brought to the hearing, and all the facilities know that the patient has a right to be at the hearing. And so the patient has several, as Judge Yeager pointed out, points of protection, both in the system itself and really through defense counsel being appointed.
I think that's important to cover because I'm not sure what people might think looking at it from the outside, but there are a lot of protections, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I should probably also add, sometimes a patient may not want to appear at the hearing. And if that happens, we make sure before we do anything in the hearing that they are told that they have a right to be at the hearing, that there are certain decisions that could be made even without them there, including the fact that they could be held against their will at the hospital for up to 6 months. Things like that. So that way they know that there are other possible consequences, even if they're not there at the hearing, but they have that opportunity and are notified of their right to be heard.
Okay, so before I move on with this, I want to make sure I myself and the audience, what is the difference? What are the distinctions between civil commitments, involuntary civil commitments, and the Assisted Outpatient Treatment program?
So an involuntary civil commitment is commitment to a hospital where they are undergoing treatment for up to 6 months against their will. Commitment to assisted outpatient treatment is commitment to outpatient treatment. And technically it is against their will, but the vast majority of the time they actually are willing participants.
Okay, so what would be the criteria that would make someone qualify for AOT versus a civil commitment?
So it's interesting because the civil commitment requires that the person is a danger themselves or others, but you need 2 hospitalizations, which is what a civil commitment is, to qualify to go to assisted outpatient treatment, either that or incarcerations. So one is potentially necessary to lead to the next step. The goal is always to try to, hospitalization is the most severe limitation of freedom. So the goal with those is really to keep stepping them down to outpatient treatment that's supervised, eventually voluntary outpatient treatment. So it's really all on a spectrum.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this episode of I'll Allow It Nevada. We're always striving to bring you valuable insights and education, not just for judicial officers, but for anyone interested in the Nevada judiciary. If you find our content helpful or intriguing, please share your experience with your friends, family, and colleagues. Your support helps us reach a broader audience and ensures that more people can benefit from our discussions. Thank you for listening and supporting I'll Allow It Nevada. So with this additional context, can we just touch again really quick on the goals of AOT and how has AOT been effective in meeting those goals?
So the main goals of AOT is really to stop the quote revolving door of participants from going in and out of the hospital multiple times a year, in and out of jail multiple times a year, at the ER multiple times during the year. So it's really a reduction of those moments by helping them stabilize in the community with medication and outpatient treatment. The statistic that Washoe County prepared in 2019, because we had a SAMHSA grant for our program, we compared the participants the year prior to being in the AOT program to the year they were in the AOT program. And we found a 61% reduction of hospital petitions and a 73% reduction of jail days. So simply by having this really intensive outpatient treatment, really minimize how many times they're in the hospital and in jail during that year with those supports compared to being in the community without those supports.
Wow, that's amazing. That's quite an impact. With that, so do either of you have any like success stories or examples that kind of stick out to you to kind of illustrate the impact of AOT?
Sure. I have an example when early on, there was a woman who had actually like a late onset schizophrenia. She was highly productive, working, doing really, really well. And then the way that she came to the attention of us, it was through a civil commitment. And what had happened is that she was in Las Vegas, and it was during the summer, which, as you can imagine, it was really, really hot. She had schizophrenia with catatonic features and ended up standing in a parking lot in the hot sun for something like 4 or 5 hours, just completely immobile, and ended up getting like 2nd and 3rd degree burns on her body because of her schizophrenia. So she ended up coming to us through that civil commitment process. We saw her a couple of times again afterwards because she would not take the medication consistently. And so she got referred to the Assisted Outpatient Treatment program. And then with that additional support, she was able to get back on her feet, get stable, regain employment. And so after she was in AOT for 6 months, they stepped her down to supportive outpatient treatment, which is less intensive. And then after that, where she had a case manager assigned and all that kind of thing, she has consistently maintained her ability to live independently, manage her medications appropriately. So our goal with AOT is not a lifelong type of thing. It's like an emergency 6 months where we get them stabilized and move them on to less intensive services. And that has been extremely successful.
Wonderful. I'll share a story on the other spectrum because there are some individuals that probably could use some lifelong support because of their just inability to really live independent lives. And so, I have one male participant who's been in the program for about 3 years now, has been in and out of the hospital, in and out of jail, just, for neglect reasons, trespassing, being where he shouldn't be. And really, he's been in a sane group home. He's been taking his medications, his paranoia of, calling 911 because he thinks people are trying to kill him has really decreased. But really, I think he has stayed successful mainly because he's had those continued supports in there. Eventually, we always try to get to the goal of where they don't need AOT, but there's definitely some individuals that really need intensive wraparound services to continue, even if they're not under court-ordered supervision. But, his defense attorney has even said he was in and out of jail every single week or in the hospital every single week until he was in the AOT program. So it truly can also have a wide benefit on a wide range for individuals.
That's amazing. That's crazy.
Yeah, I think anytime that we are able to decrease the number of times that they end up in jail or in the hospital, it is a huge win. And the other thing I think that's important to note is that the AOT participant creates these relationships with their case manager, with the judge, with their psychiatrist. And so because the judge is seeing them frequently, they are able to really have those discussions that they need to about medication and things like that, that can really help motivate that person to continue to do well.
So in this process, AOT, how do community-based mental health services integrate with AOT, and what resources are available?
So I know in NAMS will sometimes use different programs like Rising Star for in-home assistance when we have people in independent housing versus in group homes. So we'll utilize those resources. Some of our participants also qualify for Sierra Regional Center due to their cognitive level. So we'll partner with those agencies for, family support. NAMI is often, a nonprofit supportive role to help families also navigate, their lives with their mentally ill loved ones. So those are the main organizations that I know our program has linked together. But our music program, we have a local nonprofit music group that comes in to have the music groups with us. So it's so they're the Notables Music Therapy. And so we will link those different, agencies or groups that can come in and help us provide groups or services to our participants or their family members.
I would also add that we also have community service providers for substance use disorder that the participant may get referred to as well, since oftentimes people with mental health issues also have a co-occurring substance use disorder. So that way they can get educated and also understand how having or using substance or illicit drugs can really affect how their medication works. So that's also an important piece.
Awesome. I'm going to start rounding out this discussion. So our audience does include a number of judges and legal professionals. So what advice would you give to legal professionals or judges who work in these types of cases?
I would say really practice patience and empathy, and, make sure that whatever you do, it is a judgment-free zone, right? Take in information, discuss that information in a thoughtful way with the participant, take in the information from the treatment providers so that way, leave the professional decisions about clinical things to the professionals, And then, just recognize that you're there to help motivate and enforce the supports that are there.
I would completely agree. And I would also add that I think the professional should be aware that these participants suffer from anosognosia, which is most times completely unaware that they have a mental illness. So that's kind of a starting point when you're dealing with these individuals. And so learning a skill set of, being judgment free, maybe motivational interviewing to, talk that individual into why this is helpful to them. I was actually just at a symposium put on by Treatment Advocacy Center, and Dr. Xavier Amador talked about the LEAP method of working with these individuals, which stands for listen, emphasize, agree, and partner, which is really a method of communication. And so it's fascinating. It's a whole different language. I'm going to try to learn it. I know I'm not going to be doing it well immediately, but I feel it's really making that connection with that individual that you're trying to help is really paramount in these situations. So,
right. And, I think having that individual know that you care about them and are invested in their success is really key. So, making sure that any communications that you have in the hearings reflect that can really make a huge difference.
And I also just add that, a lot of these participants come to have past court experiences that were probably traumatic to them. So understanding they're also coming from a place of trauma in the courtroom setting, and being aware of that and trying to minimize that the best you can, I think is also good to be aware of.
And I will also say, meeting them where they're at and celebrating the small successes.
That's important.
Right? No one's ever going to be like the perfect participant. There's always going to be issues. But, if someone showed up to something, that's a huge win, right? So just being able to encourage them and say, great job doing this. Let's keep this, keep it going is always great.
Awesome. Perfect. Amazing. Lastly, but certainly not least, before we close out this episode, is there anything else you want to share with our audience on this topic?
I just want to address some of the stigma that can go with mental illness. And one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that people realize now how important mental health is, and that it really is just a part of your wellness. But just making sure that people understand that mental illness is a brain disease, right? And just like any other type of disease, like diabetes or, cholesterol, high cholesterol, any of those types of things is something that has to be managed with medication. And that the person that has the disease should not be blamed for having a disease. That, instead we should be looking at all the different ways that we can support that person. I know that it is different than some of the other diseases because the symptoms manifest themselves in behaviors because of the brain disease, but that we should have an understanding that it truly is a disease, that we need to be looking at all the different ways that we can help that person manage it.
So when I used to have clients with mental illness, I would say, no one chooses to be mentally ill. Just like Judge Yeager said, it is a health issue. And so when we see it as just a health issue versus something different, it definitely changes the perspective of how we treat these individuals and how we should treat these individuals. So I appreciate and agree with Judge Yeager's sentiments. So thank you.
Thank you both, judges, for Firstly, thanks for everything you do for our state and for supporting your respective communities. And I really appreciate you both taking the time to join me on the podcast to talk about this.
Thank you, Seth.
It was a pleasure. And hopefully we can, I would love to dive in deeper into each of these things with you guys at a future time. But thank you guys both very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Anytime.
A heartfelt appreciation to our guests and to everyone who has tuned in to this episode. Before we wrap up, here are a couple of quick important reminders. For continuing legal education credit, be sure to complete a certificate of attendance and email it to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. If you have any questions, topic suggestions, or comments, we welcome your input. You can email them to us at jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov or submit your topic idea through our topic suggestion form linked in the episode description. We value and look forward to hearing from our listeners. Stay tuned for more episodes of I'll Allow It Nevada. This is Seth Easley signing off. Take care, Nevada.